Okay, let's dive in. You might have actually missed this, but in Jordan's recent parliamentary elections, something pretty interesting happened.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, the Islamist opposition, they made the biggest gains of any opposition group.
Really? How big are we talking?
Around a fifth of the seats. It's, a noticeable shift.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that is significant.
So the big question, the one we really want to unpack today, is what's driving this? What's behind this change in Jordan's political scene?
Right. And it seems like there are several kind of key factors all coming together at once.
Exactly.
So in this deep dive, we're going to explore these Jordanian elections, really zeroing in on the rise of the Islamic Action Front, the IAF.
Okay.
And to do that, we're drawing on, news reports from around the election time, some academic analysis on the IAF and the Muslim Brotherhood, and other background info just to get the full picture.
Perfect. So our mission here is to give you the essential story, why these events matter for Jordan, yes, but also for the whole region.
And some of the connections might be a bit surprising.
Definitely. We want to equip you with a solid grasp of it all without, drowning you in tiny details.
Good.
So to kick us off, what's the absolute crucial thing we need to understand about these election results first?
Well, the timing. The timing of these elections, which were, very recent, is absolutely critical.
Okay.
These big gains by the IAF. And just a reminder, that's the political wing of the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan.
Right.
They seem very, very closely tied to the ongoing war in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Reports suggest there's just this huge surge in anger within Jordan directed at Israel because of the conflict.
Absolutely. And the scale of it. I mean, the health ministry numbers, over 40,000 deaths reported in Gaza.
Yeah.
That clearly hits hard in Jordan.
It really does.
And you have to remember the demographics there. A huge portion, maybe even a majority of Jordan's population has Palestinian roots.
Yeah, going back to 1948 and the later wars.
Exactly. People forced from their homes or descendants of those people. So there's this deep personal connection for so many.
Mm-hmm.
So is it fair to say the Gaza war basically just amplified existing feelings and maybe channeled them towards the IAF?
That's a really good way to put it, yeah. It acted like a magnifying glass.
Okay.
And interestingly, while the overall voter turnout across Jordan wasn't super high, maybe around 32% on average.
Right, I saw that.
Where people voted made a difference. Turnout was reportedly higher in more tribal areas, but actually lower in Amman, the capital.
So that suggests maybe different levels of engagement or perhaps different priorities across the country.
It could well do. It points to some variation within Jordanian society, for sure.
And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting.
Go on.
The IAF's traditional base, that's usually urban, conservative Muslim communities, right?
Generally, yes.
But this time reports say they actually broadened their reach quite a bit.
How so?
They managed to forge alliances with groups you might not expect. Tribal leaders, even some Christian figures reportedly came on board.
Wow, okay. That is interesting. That suggests maybe a wider dissatisfaction. Or maybe just a united front on certain really key issues like Gaza, perhaps. It certainly points that way. Mm-hmm. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the IAF's link to the Muslim Brotherhood is just fundamental here.
Right. But we need to be clear on that relationship, don't we?
We do, because the Muslim Brotherhood organization itself, Jordan's highest court, actually dissolved it back in 2020.
Why was that?
For apparently not complying with registration laws. So the Brotherhood as an organization, it can't actually field candidates directly in elections anymore.
Okay, got it. So the IAF steps in.
Exactly. The IAF functions as a separate, legally registered political party. Yeah. You could think of the Brotherhood as the kind of broader movement, maybe, and the IAF is the specific political vehicle for elections.
And they've been around for a while, right, as an opposition voice?
Oh, yeah. The IAF has historically been a pretty significant opposition force in Jordan, even before this recent surge.
And what about their rhetoric now, especially with these gains?
Well, it's been quite strong. The leadership, particularly Murad Adailah, who heads the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, we've seen reports of him leading chants like, "We are all Hamas."
Wow.
And calls to actually break Jordan's peace treaty with Israel.
The one from 94.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Signed in 1994, which is a really significant stance to take.
Especially when you consider Jordan's relationship with the U.S., a major donor, and the U.S. designation of Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Precisely. It really highlights the tightrope Jordan's walking, doesn't it?
It really does. You've got the government maintaining this peace treaty, but a large part of the population feeling incredibly strongly about the Palestinian situation because of Gaza and their own history. It's such a delicate balance. And the IAF, how are they framing this electoral success?
Well, they've apparently described it as a kind of popular referendum.
A referendum on what?
Signaling, in their view, popular support for Hamas and a clear rejection of that peace treaty with Israel.
That's a bold interpretation, a powerful statement about the public mood, at least from their perspective.
It is, but, it's also really important to remember this level of success hasn't always been the norm for the IAF.
No, definitely not. You look back at their history, it's much more varied.
Exactly. Give us an example.
Well, like in 2007, they had a really low point, I think only 6 seats.
Right.
And then there were whole periods where they just boycotted elections entirely, like in 97, 2010, 2013. They weren't even participating.
So let's jump up to 31 seats now in this latest election.
Yeah, it's a really dramatic shift. Shows how quickly political winds can change, especially with a major external event like the Gaza war.
It really does. And this brings us to the broader regional context, which is, well, fascinating and complicated.
The Muslim Brotherhood issue isn't just about Jordan, is it?
Not at all. It's a major fault line, really sensitive, right across the Middle East. Some analysts even talk about a bipolar conflict in the region revolving around the Brotherhood.
Okay, let's unpack that regional divide. Who's on which side and why?
Okay, so on one side, you've generally got countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt.
Right.
They tend to view the Muslim Brotherhood as, frankly, a threat to their internal stability, to their ruling structures, often hereditary power.
Like monarchies.
Exactly. And maybe to their more secular political agendas, too. They see the Brotherhood's history of, mass mobilization, organizing people at the grassroots level.
As a potential challenge to their own authority.
Precisely. If you're running a top-down system, an organization with that kind of popular reach can look pretty destabilizing.
That makes sense. So who's on the other side of this? Who sees the Brotherhood differently?
Well, on the other side, historically, you've seen countries like Turkey and Qatar being more supportive.
And their motivation.
Often seen as a way to expand their own influence in the region, perhaps. Or maybe as a counterweight to their rivals, like the Saudi UAE bloc.
And this isn't just like theoretical disagreements, right? This has had real-world impacts.
Oh, absolutely. This regional split, this pro versus anti-Brotherhood tension, it's been identified as a major factor behind things like the Qatar diplomatic crisis a few years back.
I remember that.
And even in ongoing conflicts like the civil war in Libya, you see different factions aligning with one side or the other, often reflecting this broader regional dynamic over the Brotherhood.
Wow. So Jordan is sitting right in the middle of all these regional crosscurrents.
Smack dab in the middle.
How does the Jordanian government, the king, navigate this?
Well, Jordan's a constitutional monarchy. King Abdullah II still holds significant power, appointing the government, dissolving parliament, that sort of thing.
Even with recent electoral reforms, I heard they tried to boost parties and things.
Yeah, there were reforms a couple of years ago aimed at encouraging political parties, increasing seats for women, lowering the candidate age, trying to nudge towards greater democratization.
Okay.
But the king retains ultimate authority. And historically, the government's approach to the Muslim Brotherhood has been, well, a balancing act.
Trying to keep them in check, but not completely shut them down?
Sort of. Trying to limit their power, maybe co-opt them sometimes, while still allowing some space for political expression. It's been a careful dance for decades.
But you said earlier things might be shifting. It sounds like that balancing act is becoming harder, or maybe the government's changing its strategy.
That's a really key observation, yeah. There seems to have been a noticeable shift towards a much tougher stance against the Muslim Brotherhood recently.
How so?
Well, just this year, 2025, Jordan officially outlawed the organization. Banned it.
Outlawed the Brotherhood itself, not just the IAF party.
The Brotherhood organization, yes.
Yeah.
And this apparently included confiscating their assets.
What triggered such a drastic move?
It followed accusations that the Brotherhood was involved in what the government called a sabotage plot.
Sabotage? That sounds serious. What were the details?
Well, reports suggested that Jordanian authorities uncovered a plot involving making rockets and drones.
Wow.
And possessing explosives and firearms. Apparently, 16 people were arrested.
And they linked this directly to the Brotherhood.
The government did, yes. They mentioned alleged links to Lebanon, possibly Iran. Even talked about confessions indicating training received in Lebanon, maybe with groups like Hamas or Hezbollah. They referred to the arrested individuals as belonging to unlicensed groups, which is generally understood to mean the Brotherhood.
That is a major escalation, a fundamental shift from that previous balancing act.
It certainly looks that way. Although, it's interesting, the Secretary General of the IAF, the political party,
Yeah.
he publicly stated that the party has no relationship with any other organizational body, whatever it may be.
Trying to distance the party from the now outlawed Brotherhood organization.
Seems like it. Trying to draw a clear line, legally speaking.
But does the government see it that way?
Well, King Abdullah himself recently issued warnings against those taking orders from abroad, which is widely interpreted as a direct shot at the Muslim Brotherhood, implying external influence or direction.
So, this crackdown, the ban, the arrests, it naturally makes you wonder about the wider space for civil society for dissent in Jordan, doesn't it?
It definitely does. Jordan's legal framework for civil society organizations, including political parties, already had some constraints.
Like what?
Well, there's historically been this provision that societies, which includes parties, cannot have political goals, which sounds a bit contradictory, but it's there.
Huh.
And there's also a requirement for prior government approval if any civil society group wants to get foreign funding.
Okay, so some controls already existed. Anything new that's causing concern?
There are concerns about a cybercrimes law passed in 2023.
Why?
Because it has broad language that critics worry could be used to stifle online freedom of expression, especially criticism of the government or anything deemed harmful to national unity.
So potentially someone criticizing the government's stance on Gaza online could fall foul of that.
That's the concern, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially given how central the Gaza issue was to these election results. And we have actually seen reports of arrests of protesters who were critical of the government's position on Gaza.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together.
Right.
We've seen this significant boost for the Islamist opposition, the IAF, in Jordan's recent elections.
Yep, winning about a fifth of the seats.
And this seems largely fueled by widespread public anger over the war in Gaza, amplified by Jordan's large Palestinian population.
Correct. That seems to be the main catalyst.
But this is all happening within a complicated regional picture where the Muslim Brotherhood, the IAF's parent organization, is a really divisive issue.
Absolutely. You have that Saudi-Egypt bloc versus the Turkey-Qatar approach.
And now, maybe partly in response to the IAF's gains, or maybe due to these alleged security threats, the Jordanian government itself has taken a much harder line.
Yeah, banning the Brotherhood organization, confiscating assets, talking about sabotage plots. It's a definite shift from the old balancing act.
It's a really complex mix of domestic anger, regional politics, and national security concerns all swirling around.
That sums it up pretty well. The Gaza war definitely lit a fire under existing public sentiment, boosting the IAF politically. But Jordan has to manage that domestic pressure alongside its regional alliances, its relationship with the West, and its own internal security.
That recent ban and the sabotage accusations, they really do feel like a potential turning point, don't they?
They really do. It signals a potentially much less tolerant approach from the state going forward.
Okay. Well, hopefully this deep dive has helped make sense of this intricate situation for you, connecting the dots between the election results, Gaza, the Brotherhood, and Jordan's tricky position.
Yeah, hopefully it's provided some clarity on how all these different pieces fit together.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it?
Oh, if that.
Well, given this strong public sentiment we've talked about, especially regarding Palestine, and now this much firmer government crackdown,
Right.
What does the future actually hold?
You mean for political expression in Jordan?
Yeah, for political expression, for the role of Islamist movements like the IAF, not just in Jordan, but maybe reflecting trends elsewhere.
And what could the implications be for Jordan's own stability and its relationships with key players like the U.S. or its neighbors?
Exactly. Lots to think about there. Definitely something to keep an eye on going forward.